America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reese Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reese Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
All right. Hey, y'all. Welcome to Water Break. It's good to be with you. Very excited to have Joel Greene back in the studio. Not in the studio, but in the studio, but not in the studio.
His face is with us.
Yes. Through the internet. Excited to be talking to him again. We're actually going to talk about what does the evolutionary mindset have to do with health and fitness and why it's actually bad for your health and fitness.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear him talk on this. I've listened to almost every interview Joel's ever done, but I've never heard him talk on this topic. So I'm super excited. Yeah,
and this is actually, I mean, if you go back to enlightenment, he went back 100 years. And just when we were talking before the show, and this kind of thinking, it's amazing how it changes, the Christian creation view of your life as it relates to God, His image in the world. Really comes into very practical understanding of health and fitness. So very excited to be
pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I would think. Yeah.
So if you guys want to be in conversation with us, email us at RenchMedia@gmail.com, RenchMedia@gmail.com. Follow my wife on Instagram.
Yep.
Follow me on Twitter. Just, Google Gabe, Google Annie, and you'll probably find our channels. And you can follow us there. If you guys want to be in supporting us, you can reach out through RenchMedia@gmail.com or join our Fight Laugh Feast Club. We actually just onboarded one of our first corporate partners.
Really?
A sauna corporate partner.
Oh yeah,
About that. We've been talking about that.
Sometimes I find out new information right here on the show.
So we didn't really want to onboard any advertisers, corporate partners last year, just because it's our first year. Now we're out of that year. We think we can do better for you guys, and so very excited to be onboarding corporate partners. Reach out to us again, RenchMedia@gmail.com. Glad to work with you on what a corporate partnership might look like. So is that our introduction? Who do we got coming up? We got any more interviews coming up that we've scheduled?
We have Dr. Patrick Flynn
coming
next
up too.
Week,
okay,
yeah,
so,
next week.
All right, man, 3 in a row.
Talk about hormones.
All right, with that said, let's bring in Joel Greene. Joel Greene is I think
this is the best. Are you going to make up his intro?
I'm going to make up Joel's intro.
I'm sorry. He does this to everybody. Let's see what he thinks.
He's 36 and a half years old. He's a health and fitness guru. We actually
That part's right.
Did you find out about Joel through big on gut?
Yeah.
Did you find out about Joel through our friend Ben Greenfield? Is that right?
Okay. No, I found you before.
Ooh,
just so
how about that,
I win.
Joel?
But I do think Ben blew you up a while ago. That you put you on the map. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we broke the internet in 2020 for sure.
You did. I think you did.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What was about that interview that broke the internet?
It was like a maelstrom of stuff no one had ever heard before, and all of it now has become the mainstream. So it was the whole fabric of what I wrote in my book and published in late 2019, 2020, which was the immunity code. And if you go back and reread that, virtually everything in there has become the mainstream, and nobody had ever heard of any of it. So that was like things like acromantia and HMOs and microdosing or exercise snacks and
you're right. You were the first one.
Literally everything down to supplements like apigenin and fisetin and just butyrate and it was like this storm of stuff that no one had ever heard. And so there was so much of it compacted into, it wasn't just one thing, it was 200 things. And so it kind of became like a little cult following here for a couple of years.
Yeah,
it did.
And what's happened, ironically, is so much of it has been borrowed and lifted that the vast majority of people now don't even know where it started. Like, example, mouth taping. No one had ever heard of mouth taping and nose strips prior to my book. And then I sold quite a few copies of that. So a lot of influencers read it and there were companies started out of it, literally, selling mouth tape and all that. And just, it was this firestorm of like, stuff. So. Yeah.
Wow.
It's true. And your name will come up if you search certain things like red phenols or just random stuff. It'll be like Joel Greene. Like your name's attached to it.
Amazing SEO.
Yeah.
No, none. The funny thing was the other day I was looking for something on Grok, and I wanted to see who had thought the farthest down this road with something that was in the original book, which was the adaptions to body fat based on fat loss, and it has to do with what's called the extracellular matrix. And so I queried Grok, like, hey, who's the leading thinker on the extracellular matrix post fat loss? And it popped my name.
Wow.
I'm not surprised though, because and I hope that we get time to talk about this at the end here, because I know we want to talk about evolution, but you are the only one talking about the post fat loss state and the issue that, you're really the biggest voice there, I think. Are there other people that you know of who are talking about this? Health coaches know about it. They know it's not that hard to lose weight. It's hard to keep it off. Anyone who's dieted for long enough knows that's the hard part. But you've built an entire program, like, right? You added that onto your weight loss program, was like how to keep it off, right?
Yeah, it's the most important part, because so what's missing with fat loss and weight loss is the analogy would be this: if you went to hire a Sherpa to get you up the mountain, and you had all these Sherpas, all these carnival barkers, barking for your business, and you just started asking them, hey, have you been up the mountain? What you get is, I've been to like the 5,000 feet, or I've been to 10,000 feet. I haven't been all over the mountain, but I'll get you there. Don't worry. Well, that's the analogy there, is to say that there's a road, a journey, and a map. And what you don't discover until you get to the top of the mountain is that the thing you think solves the problem, which is the weight loss before after transformation, you think that solved the problem. It actually started an entire lifetime of increasing the problem. And it's so counterintuitive. It's you think that, I did the carnivore diet and I lost all this weight and now I'm saved. Yeah, everything's great. Yeah. No, you didn't. No, here's what most of you are going to do. 95% of you are going to do. And you won't know this until you live it out for 30, 40 plus years. Yeah. Is that you because the body is designed to survive, not look good. It's designed to survive. The body has, it's over 30.
It's a lot.
It's over 30 mechanisms that are designed to work together efficiently to regain weight, which statistically, empirically, you can validate that in a second by looking at the research. 95% of people regain 90% of the weight in 5 years.
Wow.
And the reason is there is a whole set of mechanisms that kicks in post-fat loss, and it takes about a year. And the most common outcome from fat loss is you not only regain the weight, but you start a cycle of regaining the weight and losing the weight. And it gets harder and harder and harder over time, because you're wearing out the body's ability to shrink fat cells and drop weight. You're wearing it out. So by the time you're 50, very, very hard. Very hard to drop fat.
Yeah.
Nothing works anymore. Yeah. Can you list for our audience a couple of, I know there's a lot of mechanisms, but a couple, I know there's hormonal, there's things that work at the brain level, there's things that are structural in the fat cell. Would you explain for them? Because I think most people have experienced this. If they really think back on their life, it's not that hard to crash diet. If you're just eat grapefruits and nothing else for 3 weeks, you'll lose weight. But then why do you gain it back so rapidly? And then oftentimes, and then some, right? And then why is it a little bit harder every time you, to quote you, go back to the weight loss well?
Well, just so suspend for a minute all of the words we use, because words program thought. Words program how we think. So let's not use any of the common words we use. Let's just go back a few thousand years and just think of feast and famine. Let's just think about that. Okay. So famine's a real thing. It's always been there all throughout human history. You read the Bible and it talks famines. There's going to be a famine.
Yeah. Right.
So if the body was wired in such a way that it just easily lost weight and kept it off, there'd be no human race.
True.
We wouldn't be here. Okay. Right. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah. Gaming would kill us in weeks.
Yeah. Right.
It's the opposite. So what it is there are numerous mechanisms, and there's only one endpoint, which is survive. And the way to survive post-famine is to efficiently put the lost energy, the lost weight back on, because it's that fat that kept you alive in the famine. And then you're not dealing with a linear variable. You're dealing with something that looks like a curve. So it gets the body basically adapts to what you throw at it, and it gets tougher and tougher and tougher. Now, the modern proof of this is, if anybody listening is into mixed martial arts, just go watch athletes who do weight cutting for a living, and you will consistently see one thing hold up, which is the weights they made early in their career, they can't make anymore later in their career. And in Joe Rogan's own words, the body develops a resistance to weight cutting. It's a survival adaptation. So the body's not designed to allow you to just strip weight off and keep it off, because it doesn't favor survival. It favors dying. So mechanistically, a really interesting one, and you'll never hear about this, and it's so important, is the types of collagen fibers that make up the support structure of your body fat. They're different types, and they change post fat loss. So, for example, if you were to look at like a scanning electron microscope of the extracellular matrix that holds your fat before and after, what you would see is that it looks different after fat, especially after multiple episodes of losing fat. And the reason is this: when you lose body fat, the body has to make these specialized proteins that allow the support structure to collapse and reshape. Okay, so we got to go from bigger to smaller. So the way that works is there's special enzymes. These are called matrix melanoproteases, and they allow that structure that holds your fat in place to temporarily kind of become pliable, and it can shrink down. Okay. The problem is, think of it like a smart building that's going through lots of earthquake tremors. The smart building, because it's run by an intelligence, loads more rebar in the next time. It doesn't just build it back the way it was. It builds it back stronger and tougher and more stiff. Okay. Well, there are different types of collagen fibers, very specific, that get loaded in to the post-fat loss support structure. One of them is called, you see more of what's called collagen 6. Collagen 6 has multiple variations on it. Some of them are inflammatory. So what happens is, you had normal collagen, like collagen 3, collagen 2, collagen 4 type fibers. You do the post-fat loss thing, the enzymes break down the structure. Now the body has to build that structure back, but now it's loading in stiffer types of collagen. It's loading in the collagen 6. There's one called collagen 6A23. This particular collagen is really fascinating. It works like a signal beacon. So what it does is, it's an inflammatory collagen, and when it's loaded into the support structure, just think of it like a thorn in the flesh. It's driving inflammation continually, and so what that does is it reprograms the structure that holds your fat cells up. It draws in immune cells, and it changes the game. And so after years and years and years of this, and by the way, this isn't just true of fat, it's true of muscle, it's true of anything, you can get what's called fibrosis. Fibrosis means that you have really stiff, non-pliable support tissue. Now, when you get fibrosis in, muscle, you can't gain muscle, because your muscle is all stuck together at a microscopic level. When you get fibrosis in body fat from yo-yo dieting year after year after year, the support structure can no longer deform. It can't shrink down because it's too stiff. So what does that mean? I mean, you can't lose weight, because the fat cells can't release. They can't release fat.
That's interesting. Yeah, nobody talks about that.
Yeah, and you're basically you're talking about, almost in one sense, this kind of reversing the metaphor here, but almost in one sense, like a virus mutates, but usually the mutation means it gets weaker over time. Here, the fat cells mutate and they get stronger over time, harder to deal with and lose weight over time.
Yeah, the hardest thing to get your arms around is how ridiculously complex this is. Like I've looked at this a long, long time, and it's even hard for me to describe what's going on, but it's basically this. It's basically that You can think of the nucleus of a cell sort of as a computer processor, okay? And it's programmatic by its very nature. And you can think of the collagen fibers sort of as probes or signal beacons, and they're sending back telemetry to the nucleus. And based on those signals, the nucleus is reprogramming the types of collagen fibers that's going to stick back in. So there's this feed forward loop, this feedback loop between the support structure of your fat and the nucleus within fat cells. And it's communicative and it's programmatic in its nature. It's not dumb. It's not simple. It's not like, you know, one and done, you solve the problem, give it to me. I just want it to be simple. It's so ridiculously complex that I don't even really like to get into it too much because it loses people. But, you know, the reason it's important to understand is that every now and then we kind of have to poke the balloon of the mythologies we've all been presented. You know, we need to hit them with reality. I'm just talking reality. This is the real thing I'm talking about. So it's important to poke the balloon and go, hey, whoa, yeah, this stuff you're listening to, you know, that the stuff you're listening to by all these people, they haven't been up. That Sherpa has not been up the mountain, and there's a template you need to understand. If you want to get up the mountain, you better understand the template. Like before you start the mountain, you better need, you know, you're going to need like you're going to need some pitons. You're going to need like a lifter. You know, you put it on the rope and it lifts you. You're going to need to think this out ahead of time, and that template is missing.
It's so missing. You know what it reminds me of is when we have 3 kids, and when you're in that phase of life, having a baby, especially your first one, all you think about and all you read about and the whole thing is just like birth. Like just have the baby. And like, yeah, you finally do it and you've done all this research and you know, whatever. Nobody talks about what happens when you take that baby home, postpartum, breastfeeding. Like nobody talks about this stuff. And in my opinion, that's like the actual hard part is actually when you get that baby and you put it in the car seat and you take it home and then it really starts. And I feel like weight loss is like that. Like even for some people, just losing it, like you said, gets harder and harder, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is now what? How do I keep it off? And it's just like you said, nobody's even thinking about it. You get to the point where you take the selfie, you're like, I did it. But then what? You know, like how do you keep it off? Could you talk to our audience just a little bit? Like if you could summarize some of the biggest points or strategies in your post, what do you call it? Post fat loss something. What are some things that people can think about once they lose the weight that they need to do to help these mechanisms not hurt them so much?
So there's a couple simple ideas to get. One is that you have to create incredible sensations of fullness in the post-fat loss phase, but at the same time, you have to get your metabolism up. Okay, so that's kind of
suppressed, right?
Yeah, and there's much more, but these are the kind of the first 2 bullets in the gun. So let's kind of talk about that. So So what happens in the post-fat loss phase is the body upregulates different mechanisms, different hormones that eventually make you want to eat more to replace, you know, particularly if you got there through calorie cutting. So you have to create the opposite sensations, and you have to create them strategically. You know, it can't just be a thing where, you know, you're pigging out at dinner because you're just going to regain all the weight. It's got to be very strategic.
Right.
But suffice to say that you want to have a few mornings every week for several months where you're creating overstimulus to stomach distension, to fullness, to things that are going to trigger the POMC neurons in the brain that GLP-1 hits. So you got to hit that. But at the same time, so the guesstimate is that for every kilogram you lose, you drop 15 to 30 calories in resting metabolic rate. Okay.
Right.
So at the same time, you've got to get your metabolism back up. You've got to stimulate the body's need to produce energy through food and thermogenesis and heat. So that means that at the same time, you have a very targeted cycle of things that can do that all together. So one is cold, because cold is helpful. But there are other things. There's also thermogenic agents that you can look at. Cayenne is a simple one. And mixed with that, there's specific types of exercise all together to get your metabolism up as much as you can get it up. Now, the good news is probably the most effective thing is food. Food will boost metabolism. And so if you time it correctly in that post-fat loss period, you can eat a lot of food, which itself lifts metabolism, and then you don't have to stack as many things on top of it, and that's very effective.
Right. Right.
Those are a couple of the big ones, notable ones, but there's several more.
Right. When you got a whole kind of program, correct?
Yeah,
That
it's called
people-
it's called Beat the Rebound. Yeah.
Where can people?
Where
can people go if they're curious about it? Because again, you're the only one I know talking about this, and it is a big deal.
It's the only one that exists. You can find it at veepnutrition.com.
Okay.
And if you've been doing the Ozempic thing, I would highly suggest when you come off, you do Beat the Rebound. It will serve you very, very well.
It's a huge problem. Do you ever wonder, Joel, why people don't actually use GLPs for the rebound? Like, have you ever thought about that? Like, I don't know that anybody's doing that, but doesn't that make more sense to actually use them?
It does. It's so hard to drop weight now for so many people that they can't. For a number of reasons. Yeah, it's gotten harder and harder and harder, and particularly post-COVID. So that's the problem a lot of people are up against, is they literally cannot drop weight unless it's through the GLP-1 drugs.
Joel, you got a follow-up question?
I do. Can you comment on that, especially where you just said post-COVID? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, because I work with a lot of women who are, there's reproductive things, hormonal, there's all kinds of weird things that have happened post-COVID, but the inability to lose weight where that was not an issue before is coming up a lot. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the biggest factor that is supported by the research is the devastation of the key immune-centric bacteria in the gut, which is bifidobacteria.
Okay.
So there have been a few studies published that showed that. So when I wrote the immunity code, the core of the whole idea is that you can manipulate the immune system in the body by manipulating two key bacteria. Right. They act like the key, and then by manipulating those bacteria, you can jumpstart the immune system to a younger state. Well, the most important one in that equation is the family of bifidobacteria, because that's the one you get when you're an infant from mom that sets the immune system. And so the way the immunity code works is you reset that. You reset your bifidobacteria profile and numbers to what it looked like when you were younger, and it works. I mean, it really works. Well, the problem with COVID is COVID and the spike protein, and most likely the vax, destroy the bifidobacteria in the gut. And so what that does is it destroys the basis of immunity in the gut, because the bifidobacteria works in conjunction with the human immune system to modulate T cell counts, T cell ratios, macrophages, all kinds of immune mechanisms. And what you find is that bifidobacteria indirectly and also directly regulates insulin function in conjunction with akkermansia. Those two kind of work together. And so when you dysregulate insulin function by disrupting the microbiome, you can't lose weight.
Yeah.
Are you saying that even if you aren't vaxxed and you got COVID, that this could still be an outcome of that?
Well, they're one and the same, if you think about it. I mean, so both of them rely on the spike protein to do their dirty work. Okay. It's the same mechanism either way.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you make of this is probably one of my questions I ask regularly to guys like you on our show. Where first of all, I have a massive problem with like the definition of who's fat and who's not fat and stuff like that. What does it mean to be fat?
He really does.
And then
what is it?
And then and I believe in objective truth. But it seems like our society has really kind of an obsession with fat, and we don't even have a good BMI, whatever. Like BMI is not even that good of it, and not even a good definition for it. So what do you make of that? And then I ultimately think that there's a spiritual problem that is undergirding all our views of health and fitness and, weight loss and fat. I mean, there's this in our neck of the woods, in kind of the Christian fathead world, they'll even say that, I won't even listen to a pastor who's overweight because he's not worth to listen to because he doesn't take care of his own body. And all that does is it actually causes that guy who's saying it more of a problem, because if he gains 10 pounds, then he's in sin, or whatever he wants to say about it. Whatever he wants to say about the pastor, he's got a bigger problem if he gains 10 pounds than the pastor who maybe, gains 5 pounds or whatever, Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Well, first of all, There are unique elements in play right now, and there's several that have never ever been in play in history all together at once, and they all work together to create a weight towards, or a predisposition towards gaining weight over time. Just a few top of my head. And some of these are things nobody ever talks about. One is what's called transgenerational epigenetics, and it's just that it is the genetic payload from one generation to the next of either tendency to be lean or tendency to gain weight. And if you go back and look at basically from the 1950s, there's been a plus to that, a plus payload every generation in the baton pass, so that genetically speaking, each generation is more and more programmed to gain weight. So that's one element. And then on top of that, you stack things like the overuse of prescription drugs that skyrocketed. You stack EMF fields from cell phones, which are disruptive. You stack glyphosate. You stack vaccines, which are, you get 70 now when you're a kid. It used to be 3. And then things no one ever talks about, like most likely you're inhaling aluminum every day from the air. So you take all these things together, and you kind of have to be a little bit of a realist for a second and understand the problem's never been harder than it is now. I mean, it's really hard, and that's before we even start to talk about the quality of the food in the US. Like, it's much easier if you live in Italy to stay lean. You can eat carbs in Italy and stay lean. You come here, man, you look at a jujube and you get fat. So I would just say that we're a little beyond just simply willpower at this point. There are forces at work that have never, the slope is more difficult than it's ever been. So there's that. The other side of that is, with social media, we're kind of in that era now where, it talks about, in the last days, people will surround themselves with a great many teachers saying what their itching ears want to hear, And so there's this tendency. I mean, I'm an influencer, and so I just kind of know the game. There's this tendency to the drive to get people to listen to you is as strong as anything else, and so there's this tendency to say things that are novel, but are maybe lesser truths. And so it's absolutely true that your quality of life has a lot to do with your physical wherewithal, and you really should, take care of your vessel, take care of your body. And that's very, very, very important. At some point it spills over into idolatry. And I don't know exactly where that is, but I know that it does. And that's something that, that's a problem. It's a real problem.
How about this? So I wrote down the things you listed: prescription drugs, vax, phosphate, aluminum, cell phone, stuff like that could all contribute to basically clogging your body. The way I've looked at it about this weight issue in the United States is God has been kind to us as a nation. We're the most well-fed nation in the history of the world, and so I believe some of the things you listed absolutely impact that. But God blesses with food in the scriptures, and also curses with food in scripture. You see it go both ways. And I would say we became, go back to Romans 1 we were talking about when we were offline, the first sin in Romans 1 was not giving thanks to God. And so we become an ungrateful nation. And so I see there's the spiritual side that's very much affecting the physical side. But part of this is just practically speaking, we're the first nation to have fridges in our houses. We're the first nation where I can get up at 1 a.m. in the morning, grab a snack, and go back to bed. And then almost, if you think about it, almost every meal we have as Americans is like a feast. And if you compare us, to centuries of how people ate, I get up and I can have like this full breakfast, and then I can have, burgers and fries and an appetizer for lunch, and then dinner. It's like, so it's almost like we've created every meal as a feast, when it's like, maybe you should just try to figure out, eat regularly, feed yourself in the day, make sure you got energy. And what we do what we try to do, at least in our house, is on Saturday night is when we do the big feast before church on Sunday with our kids. So like we've just consume way much more food throughout our week than any maybe I'm wrong, but I would say any civilization before really kind of the innovation of refrigerators and kind of technology like that. So I don't, any thoughts on that?
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I actually, in my my book, The Way, this is something I touch on quite a bit, and it's to learn to understand abundance versus scarcity. So scarcity isn't something that's talked about, but when you look at ancestral eating, and I've looked at it quite a bit, if there ever was such a thing, I've looked at most of the studies ever published on that. What you find is that scarcity is the constant across human history for eating until now, until like the last 100 years. And that scarcity has a lot of benefits. It has a lot of, number one, it produces variety. So there are a lot of people right now who are on the carnivore diet bandwagon. And one of the reasons I'm not and never have been and never will be is that it's a diet that only can exist in abundance. It only works if you have a refrigerator. It doesn't work if you mimic the ancestral environment, because you can't load slabs of steak and eggs and all this stuff. You just can't have it sitting around. You need a fridge. You need a fridge for the diet to work.
Right.
So right away, you have a diet that everybody thinks is going to be really healthy and all that, and it's getting back to how our ancestors ate. And just off the top, you can see that it's not, because it doesn't work without a refrigerator, and your ancestors didn't have one of those. Okay. So once you begin to understand what scarcity does dietarily, it will really shift the way you eat. And the way is built around that. It's built around the idea that you're going to spend a day mimicking foraging foods, and that's mimicking scarcities. And
so I think part of it is, I would say part of the practical solution is, in my mind, is not to teach people to feel guilty about their fridge, because God, that's a blessing. Now, like all technology can be a blessing and a curse. I want to teach, and I think this is getting at to maybe one of my broader problems in the health industry, is a lot of it's driven by guilt. You're too fat. You're too this. You're too, and God wants us to be grace driven, not guilt driven. And so I want to figure out how to approach the conversation from, hey, great blessing having a fridge. This is awesome. Look what God's done in our world. So cool. I was just literally talking to a friend today, and he works in the nuclear engineering world, and he said, yeah, we're about 20 minutes away from turning on a new nuclear power plant, and he's going to hit the button. It's just amazing just talking to him. But right before he did that, I'm like, look at what God has allowed man to do. But like your iPhone could be a massive blessing and a massive curse, so all technology is that way. So I want to kind of figure out how to approach the conversation from, hey, look at this fridge. How can you handle your diet in light of all these blessings, and how should you be thinking about maybe losing weight in light of kind of how good God is and the blessings in your life? Does that angle make sense to you? And again, I haven't read your book. My wife does all the reading, and I hear her. So you might be repeating some things here.
Yeah, I mean, the first I'll say on that is that it's very difficult to handle blessings well. Most generations don't handle them very well. Like if you look at the history of the Jews in Israel, you have a reproved generation, one that's come out of hardship, and for a couple generations you do really, really well. Because you have people that are close to hardship. So David, and for a while Solomon. But once you get beyond that, and you have just kind of perpetual abundance and blessing, it's very difficult to handle it well. That's right. Very difficult.
That's a good point.
So
but God wants us to generationally learn how to handle it well. That's the thing. You look at Israel, and once they got into the promised land, it was like 40 years before they started, so one generation before they started tanking and rebelling against God, and then God judges them, and then God punishes them, puts them in slavery, and then Israel starts crying out, and then so that cycle of not handling God's blessing well is the problem, and God actually wants us to learn how to handle blessings well. And he says, in Deuteronomy and Exodus, when it's talking about the law, to 1,000 generations. If you obey me, I'll bless you to 1,000 generations. If you disobey me, I'll curse you to the third and fourth. So I agree with you. That's the central problem, I think, with blessing, is that the church, God's people, doesn't know how to handle it well, and we need to figure out how to live a life of repentance, faithfulness, and trust in God, even when things are amazing.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, well said.
So how do we started off behind the scenes. How does the view of evolution kind of play into how it hurts our view of fitness, health, diets, and all that?
Well, the first thing to understand is that, how do we know truth? How do we come to truth? Because that's all you're after. With these questions, we're after what's true. Yeah. What's the most true? That's all we're really looking for. And you always have to kind of come back to what's true. We're trying to figure out what's true, and how do we know what's true? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When you approach that question, you see something very interesting over about the last 120 years. And it's that the way that people arrive at truth is very different now from how historically they have. An interesting exercise is to go and read letters between people, like in the 1700s, like Thomas Jefferson writing, to, whoever, Alexander Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see is that people really, they're very hard to follow. Like, if you've ever done this exercise, because the thoughts are so intricate and they're so complex, they're bereft of diff and dat, it's like, man, this guy's really thinking through. I'm having a hard time tracking with this. But what you notice is that people used to think and make up their own minds, mostly. What you have today is what, in my book, the way I call the infantilism of the adult mind. And the analogy is, why did you stop believing in Santa Claus? Or why did you believe in Santa Claus in the first place? The answer is, well, mommy and daddy told me, about Santa Claus. And so the thing was, they were lying. Mom and dad were lying to you. There was no Santa Claus. They just lied.
Yeah.
But you believe them until eventually what happened is you stop believing in Santa Claus. And if you go, well, what's the thing that stopped me believing in Santa Claus? Was it I caught dad putting stuff under the tree? No, it was peer pressure. It was that someone in school goes, you still believe in Santa Claus? You're a dork. Don't you know that's a lie? And you were like, oh, and then you realize mom and dad just made it up, and you kind of, slough it off. But okay. But if you think about that whole thing, what's going on is two things. One is that you're taking on authority something to be true, and you're not questioning it because you have a child's mind, and you just trust mom and dad, right? The other is that you in coming to a new conclusion, you didn't examine the evidence, you just bowed to peer pressure, whether or not it was true. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you have social pressure and you have authority, those two things working together. Well, suffice to say that that's how most people obtain truth nowadays is through authority figures.
Yeah.
In other words, what's happened is we have displaced mom and dad. Like what Satan does, Satan steals. That's all he can do is steal. Mm-hmm. So there's a natural allegiance to authority, which all authority comes from God. There's a natural allegiance to God that we all have through mom and dad, through the authority he's given them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Satan loves to steal. So he just puts something else in place of that. And that can be letters and symbols like PhD, MD, or that can be institutions like CDC or brand names or logos, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what that does is it sort of transplants that childlike dependence on authority into the adult mind. And once that's happened, you lose common sense. Mm-hmm. You lose the ability to just say, does this even make sense? Because the number one problem with health today is confusion. Nobody knows what to believe because you have authority figures who say the exact opposite thing. Yeah. Right. And most of the things that are being said are so absurd, so ridiculous, so without merit that I just listen to this stuff and I just have to shake my head. It's like, wow, man, you really have a lot of people fooled. You really have people fooled. I know a lot of these people don't know what they're talking about, but they sound like they do. And so the average person just has gotten away from being able to depend on seeing one thing and one thing only, and that is what's plain and obvious.
Yeah.
Now that extends to a lot of things today. The inability to see what is obvious, what is plain. That's the problem with thought in the modern era. I can give you tons of examples.
COVID.
Well, yeah, there you go. One is that the only way dietarily you're going to really achieve real and lasting health is through a diet that is balanced and diverse and nutrient dense. That's the only path long term that works. Now that's obvious, okay? but it's not. I mean, it is obvious. It should be obvious to anybody, but you have so much conflicting information from experts saying the exact opposite. No exclusion. Exclusion's how you get to health. You eliminate everything except, whatever, meat and eggs or kale, just that's the way. That's how you get there, right?
Yeah.
Well, that should be immediately apparent to anybody with a brain that could never work, because it goes against how the body works. The body works on balance and homeostasis. So if you imbalance anything, doesn't matter what it is, it can't possibly work. You don't need to be an expert to know that. You just need to have sense. But what's happened in this era is the ability to think like an adult has been lost due to this infantilism of the adult mind. So where you see this really play out is with evolution, which is the most absurd, ridiculous lie ever in human history. I mean, it's just it's flat out lie. And you don't have to take that. If you're a non-believer listening to this, don't take that as a religious totem, because all you got to do is use your head for a little bit. But you won't be able to, because the adult mind is so enslaved to what authority tells you to think. But if you just think about it scientifically, if you want to say that you're under the umbrella of science, then you have to accord that the value of any theory rests on only one thing, and that's the explanatory power of the theory. Does it explain what we see? Because if it explains everything we see perfectly, then we can have a lot of faith and trust in that theory that it's probably valid. Okay. Notice I'm not speaking in absolutes. I'm not saying we can trust in it because it is valid. I'm saying most likely. We're always knowing in degrees. Conversely, if repeatedly it fails to explain what we observe, we need a new theory. It doesn't work. Okay. That's exactly what's going on right now with the James Webb Telescope. So what's going on right now is there's all these theories of, dark energy and dark matter and expansion of the universe, and they're breaking down. They're not holding up to what we observe, because they are observing differences in things like expansion of the universe and all kinds of things where they thought it should be uniform. And so basically we need a better theory now, because the theory we have doesn't match the evidence that we see. Okay. So when you come to evolution, a couple of ground rules. Number one, again, the value of the theory rests solely on what we observe and its ability to explain it. Okay. And number two, you can't put yourself under the umbrella of science if your theory you're offering depends on carefully contrived semantics in order to survive. In other words, at some point, hard science has to win. Math, chemistry, physics has to win. If it depends solely on narrative and word choice and stories, then this is not science you're talking about. It's a con. It's something else. Okay. So the whole purpose of evolution as a theory is to understand how we got here, right? It's to explain life. If that's not the purpose of it, then tell me what it is. But that's the purpose, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's where you get into problems, because as a theory, evolution cannot explain biology. It doesn't explain what you see when you look into biology. It cannot. It just breaks down immediately, and I'll give you an example in a second. So in order to avoid that, two things happen. One is we create these fake word taxonomies. We create labels to get us out of trying to solve the problem that we can't solve. Okay. The problem you can't solve is you can't explain the origin of life. You can't with evolution. So the side step is, well, let's call it something else. So, that's abiogenesis. That's not evolution. Yeah, it is. Who told you that? Like, who put that idea in your head? Did you think of that yourself? No, you didn't. So, no, you don't understand evolution. Evolution is, about, natural selection and how brilliant natural selection is and all this stuff. No, it's not. That's a narrative. Those are fake human word taxonomies, semantics used to deflect from the real problem. So I'll give you an example. It's important to understand that humans are held accountable for knowing God because of biology. I mean, this is something never talked about, and it's so profound. If you read Romans 1, it says, since the beginning, God's invisible power and divine nature are clearly visible, evident from the things that were made. Things that were made. So in other words, we are all going to be, and finishes off by saying, so that all are without excuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You will have no excuse when you get in front of God to say, oh, I never believed in you. And God will say, it was so obvious. You don't have any excuse. Okay, let's use that as our template here. Okay. So what we're looking for are things that are so obvious, plain and obvious. Remember, the thing that's been lost is the ability to see the plain and obvious. We're looking for things that are so obvious, things that are constructed, constructs, creations, and they are so obvious, no other explanation will do. That's what we're looking for. Okay. We can start anywhere, but I like to start with the mitochondria because when you look at what's called the mitochondria, here's the analogy. Whether you have an EV or a gas-powered car, you don't have one engine. You have multiple engines working together in concert, and there's engineering in place, meaning there are problems you have to solve that cannot be solved apart from the action of thinking about it ahead of time. Okay. Yeah. So when you look at the mitochondria, they have this really interesting word. They use the word complexes to describe what we see there. Why do they call them that? Because you have these machines that are complex. They are ridiculously complex. So what do we call them? We call them complexes, right? Well, there's 5 of them. And the analogy is this. The 5th one is like a gas motor, okay? And literally, it has a crankshaft. It has a stator. It has a clutch. It has gears. I mean, literally. It literally does that. And it has RPMs. It spins at 10,000 RPMs in water. Keep in mind, 10,000. We can't build machines that can do that.
Wow.
The parts flex to keep it from flying apart. Okay. It's composed from a number of subsystems that are assembled from 2 different sets of genomes, from the human and the mitochondrial. And the parts that are assembled outside of the mitochondria have to pass through an error and quality control checking system at the gate. Okay. Which I've studied at length. It's so complex, it's ridiculous. But it's suffice to say that if you were going to make an engine, you would have an inspection process to make sure that each part is going to pass the standard. And if it doesn't, then you got to tag it and you got to remove it, right? Well, that's all there. But what gets more interesting is that there's also a starter motor. Okay, that's complex 1. And the starter motor in complex 1 takes electrical charges and does these incredible things to create the charge necessary to essentially what amounts to jumpstart complex 5. And they work together, and they have to work together at the same time, and they have to be assembled from subparts. So suffice to say that when you look at these complexes, there's something that's immediately obvious, and it's that you're looking at machinery. These are machines. These are machines that until very recently, we didn't even have the ability to understand as being machines. They were that advanced.
Right.
But now with new breakthroughs in nanotech, particularly nanotech using proteins to engineer machines out of protein, we now have a reference frame to understand what we're looking at, that this is nanotech that you're looking at. These are machines. And these are things that cannot be created through accident. In other words, Romans 1 says that it's clearly visible, meaning if you look at these, there's no experiment ever that has been created that could create these machines ever, through the mechanisms that are proposed to do it, which is time and chemistry.
Right.
Never, ever happened for more reasons we can get into here. Yeah. It's never happened. It never will. Okay. And the second is that it's clearly visible that these are things that are made. These are creations you're looking at. You can't find a science paper that doesn't use the term machinery to describe these, because machinery has machine-like function. When you see machine-like function, okay, you know that you're looking at machinery. We know intuitively there are things that can.
Oh.
Might have lost him.
Oh, bummer.
I mean, we can just finish here. He might come back in for a minute, but
I hope we get him back. That was really interesting.
Yeah,
what he was
he's
talking
basically
about.
describing a version of like intelligent design where this complex machine was created. There's no other explanation than it had to be created. It's so complex.
Yeah.
It had to be created.
Well, I love his take on Romans 1. I mean, it's not a take, it's just really clear.
Yeah.
It's just really clear, but it's easy to forget about that passage that everybody knows and is without excuse.
Yeah.
You know, so it is built into it's evident, like he's saying, but also we know.
Well, and then, my follow-up question before we were going to get off here was, how does this apply to how we view the human body and our health?
I know. I'm sure he had some great thoughts
about
that. But I mean, just alone, the thoughts that he already gave about just like think for yourself.
Yeah.
And
what did he use? What word did he use there?
Like the infantilization of the adult mind. And he does, you guys, man, I feel so bad that we lost him if he doesn't come back. But you guys,
it's okay. You got to go.
I do have to go. It just feels so rude. I don't like it. His book, a lot of the different things, we kind of went all over the place, and that's what it's like talking to Joel. You just try to glean all the, all these little nuggets from him because he's just so well thought and researched, and and just it
is a lot of this. Does he mention this in the way?
A lot of the things that he talked about.
Okay. The book, The Way.
So his first book is The Immunity Code. I did read that one first. It's a little bit of a harder read. It's a little like nerdier and like a lot of information. I had to read it, and I like that kind of stuff. And I'm in the industry, and I still had to read it at least twice,
a couple times,
maybe 3 times, to really feel like I was getting it all. I mean, as you can tell, he's very intelligent and can go right down to the minutia of things. And then he did lay out a way of eating a bunch of dietary things, and it all surrounds what he said is that you have to be balanced. And the fact that scarcity gives you variety, right? Because it forces you to eat foods of what he calls lesser preference. So if you ask anybody, and I think he talks about this too, I can't remember what I've heard in interviews, what I've read in his 2 books, but if you interview the Hadza, which is like one of the last remaining. Is he here?
Yeah, he's back.
Oh, he's back. Oh, yay.
Joel, we're gonna. My
you.
wife's got to go pick up our kids from school, so we're gonna give you one last question to wrap it up here. And I was just thinking, you're describing kind of like intelligent design, and there has to be a creator because look at how complex this is and so forth.
Yeah.
Last question here, but I wanted to ask you, okay, given God created complexity, and including, you mentioned this at the beginning of the interview, but like our bodies are so complex. How does your faith and your Christian, your walk with the Lord, and your view of that God created everything, how does that affect your view of how you look at health and even weight loss, even some of the practical things that come out in your books and in your consulting?
Well, so.
And you got about 3 minutes. minutes. Sorry to push you on this.
Sorry.
Our kids are getting out of school.
If you accept the proposition that that we are in a fallen state, which it's actually biologically quite easy to see that you're looking at machinery that has been clocked. It's been clocked, and when you look into Genesis and you look at the ages from Adam and then shrinking on down, it's a logarithmic decline. It perfectly matches
genetic entropy is what it is.
You see a logarithmic curve perfectly. So you can see that this physiology has been clocked, and you can see where you could remove the limitations to it. So you can see that all that to say, we weren't meant to be in bodies that are in decline and disrepair. That's part of the fall. And so, in God's timing, that'll all be restored. We'll have new bodies that, don't wear out, don't break down.
Yeah, that's right.
But in the meanwhile, I believe that, that part of the redemption is to obtain as much as possible the health and vitality that we were intended to have in the first place. Like Jesus came to make all things new. And that includes giving us the power to take back control over our bodies. And there's different ways we do that. Some is through knowledge. Like we learn about simple things like, I can control these 2 bacteria, and that gives me, a 20% improvement. I can control these immune cells through types of sugars, and I get another 10%. So the knowledge is breaking through, and we have a right to it. And I'll just say this, like, I mean, I'm 60 and I wish everybody had what I had. I wish everybody had. I mean, I cannot begin to describe how incredible I feel on a regular. I feel like I'm 20. I mean, like I've had to do some stuff the last few days, just business wise, that involved me having to just, like run back and forth, on a moment's notice and pick up heavy boxes and things like that. And it doesn't even faze me. It's like I'm 20, and I wish everybody had that. I really do, because it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Have you ever read? And then we got to go here. But have you ever read Genetic Entropy by John Sanford?
No, but I'm familiar with the idea.
Yeah. Okay. He was, I believe, the guy. He was kind of the first one that kind of really built the scientific research around the concept of genetic entropy beyond the theory. Maybe I could be wrong on that, but John's a Christian brother, and he wrote this really. He's actually, I host another show called Cross Politics, Jesus is Lord Over Politics, and he was probably the third interview I ever got on that show back in 2016.
I remember a
long time ago. Yeah. But he was really helpful for me in thinking just about like the idea of creation versus evolution, because evolution teaches that things get better over time, where we evolve, and it's actually evolution's chaos and it devolves,
an interesting experiment, because our time's short. I'll just give this. All right, everybody listening, here's your homework assignment. Go to X, go to Grok, and ask Grok to come up with a range of time that the human genome has left, given all of the rates of acquisition of mutations, and just ask Grok to give you a range. What is the low? What's the high? The low is going to be like, we got 80,000 years left in the genome. The high will be a couple million years.
Yeah.
But no matter how you slice it, the genome is essentially a computer program that's going to seize up eventually. It's not going to work. So it's not improving. It's debilitating over time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And thank God that Jesus rose again from the dead.
Amen.
Yeah,
thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much, Joel. I'm sorry we lost you there for just a little bit. I don't know what happened there. I'd love to have you on eventually some other time and go deep dive on the gut, your gut protocol, everything gut, because there's just a lot there. And that's super interesting to me that you mentioned that with regards to like some of the long COVID cases. So I'd love to kind of double click on that a little bit too, sometime down the road.
All right.
And
awesome.
And where can people follow you real quick? Where do you like people to go?
Yeah.
My Instagram, Real Joel Greene, and veepnutrition.com. Either one. I'm on X too, Real Joel Greene.
Yep.
Awesome. And get the book, The Way.
Yep.
Yes. It's a great book.
Thank you, sir. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. If you guys want to be following up with us, go to RenchMedia@gmail.com. Follow Andy on Instagram and me on Twitter, and we will see you guys next week. Cheers.
Next week. Bye, guys.
What if you could join a network of business leaders who share your Christian values, who reject the separation of faith and business, and who have a fierce vision for success? Welcome to Business Makers Network, a network that strives to create community, build intellectual wealth and practical business knowledge, and grow thriving businesses for the kingdom. We're not just another business network. We are a community of unapologetic Christian leaders who understand that success in business blesses our customers, blesses our families and employees, and in the end drives greater profits. All of Christ for all our business efforts as we aim to take the talents God has given us and turn them into 30, 60, and 100-fold. With a combined net worth already exceeding $1 billion in committed memberships, our members are reshaping the business landscape while staying true to our Christian values and taking dominion in the lanes God has paid for us. As a member, you'll gain exclusive access to our Business Makers Network app, discounts to live workshop events, network calls with key influencers, access to like-minded Christian business leaders, a pool of hands-on intellectual wealth and practical business knowledge, mentorship and menteeship programs. We will be rolling those out over the coming year. Read-only access for the tier above you for educational purposes. Invitations to our annual corporate partner dinner. Networking events at the Fight Laugh Feast conference. We offer membership tiers designed to match your business journey. From our exclusive Double Diamond level for industry titans, to our Greene membership for promising startups, to our MVP tier that is looking for a community of Christian, like-minded business leaders. There's a place for every serious business leader in our community. Your network is your net worth. Join Business Makers today and become a part of a movement that is changing the face of Christian business leadership. Visit our website now to secure your membership and step into a community where faith, business, and success align.